And I couldn't agree with you more. And I'd also say, too, that I know you're a very goal-oriented person, and so am I. So you're moving towards something in your immediate future, and you may have a long-term goal as well. But things may happen along the way that modify your plan. But what I want to say is this. It's amazing as we're sitting here today that probably neither one of us could have written this script. You couldn't have sat down back there when you got your job at Ford originally and said, here's what I'm going to do, and here's how this is going to play out, and I'm going to make that happen. I could have never done that. Sat down at whatever age and said, I'm going to write this out, what's going to happen here, and we're going to be sitting here at this table today discussing it. There's just no way. That's a wonderful, miraculous type of experience that is life itself.
Welcome, Alan, to the Not Almost There podcast. It is so good to be with you today.
Oh, it's great to be with you too, Joe. Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me here, and it's great to be with you. I love what you're doing.
Ditto, and I can't wait to get into your story and everything you've done over the last few decades at ABC and just throughout your life. So that's going to be really exciting. Before we get started, though, I want to just tell the audience we are at Empire, which is a local restaurant bar in the Naperville area. So if you hear background noise, excuse us.
It's normal. We're not moving the furniture around ourselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I got to know you a bit through your daughter, Kaylin. She's the local president of the Chamber of Commerce, and we have an event every year, and you were so gracious to attend it a few years back called Refuel. Kaylin walks up to me at the end of this event, and she goes, you have to hear my dad's story.
That sounds like Kaylin.
Yeah. And
she's my lead PR person.
Yeah, right? So, and her and I have become friends over the years, and she's just such a great human being. But I didn't really know your story, and then she sent me the article of your story in Chicago Magazine, and it just completely grasped you because I think it's titled like what you won't hear on the 10 o'clock news about your life essentially, and how you've been able to do what you've been able to do. So this podcast, the goal today to me is to dive deeper into, like, I want to talk about news. I want to talk about current events, how you come up with stories, how you became such a great presenter. But I think to really set this up, I want to dive deep into your story and your background because it's truly remarkable on what you've been able to overcome and accomplish in your life. And I know this really starts at a time when you didn't necessarily know what was going on. You were 4 months old.
Exactly, yeah. I had no clue, obviously. At the age of only 4 months, you're just a baby. And so it's only in then retrospect and having others tell you the story that you really learn what was going on that impacted your own life, that you had nothing to do with. But before I even get into that, Joe, I just want to say it's also amazing in all of our lives, I think, how things happen that are out of our control, and there are other things that happen that, of course, are within our control. And that fascinating combination of those things coming together and the decisions that are made along the way, often by us and sometimes by others, how that molds our lives into where we are sitting here today. And I think you'll see soon that we wouldn't be sitting here today having this conversation had things not happened along the way. Some things that were terrible and some things that were wonderfully miraculous. So, but let's go back to when I was a little baby at the age of 4 months old. When I was 4 months old, my dad was killed in a robbery in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My dad drove a truck for Bond Bread Company, not a semi-truck, but rather, back in those days, a delivery truck. So when you were delivering bread and grocery supplies to the local stores, you would go to those stores each day, of course, and deliver the breads and other things that they were purchasing from the company. And then in addition to that, you would collect the receipts from the store owners so that you would then take it back to the company, and that's how they did their business each day. And unfortunately, on that particular day in February of 1961, there were two young men, and I mean young teenagers, who held him up. He had been held up previously, too, so this was not something that was necessarily new to him, nor a threat that he was aware that this type of thing could happen now and then. But in this case, these two young men...
You're like 14, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like kids, almost, you know. So, and I'll get a little bit deeper into that, but obviously that's what happened. They shot him in the back, and he died there in the street in Philadelphia.
And he didn't even see that coming, to your knowledge?
No. Well, to my knowledge, he didn't. I mean, obviously, we don't know what he saw because no one else was there other than he and the two individuals. I will go a little bit further here without getting too deep into that case and just say that those two individuals, a lot was going on back in 1961 in this nation. These were two young men who happened to be African American. To this day, I honestly don't know. Were they investigated properly? Those who the police were attempting and prosecutors were attempting to hold accountable for my dad's murder, were they the individuals who were responsible? I don't know. And some people have asked me, well, Alan, doesn't that give you a curiosity? Don't you want to dig further and really find out what the truth is? I'm always interested in the truth. I mean, as a journalist, I've often said that that is the core of what we do. It is to find what is the truth. But in this particular case, I find it to be perhaps something that would only lead to continuing frustration. The individuals who were responsible are either very, very old or long gone. And I don't believe you're really going to find necessarily what you're looking for, searching deeply into the past for something that has already happened that you had no control over. And I think perhaps it could even become obsessive, where you would look so deeply into it that you can't then move forward, or for whatever reason, it upset things even further than what it did.
And that's what happened to your mother.
Right.
Really.
I was the youngest of 4 kids. My mother was in a wheelchair after I was born. She had difficulty whenever my brother, who's 6-7 years older than me, when he was born, she had difficulty with his birth. And so when I came along, I didn't help the situation at all. So she was in a wheelchair at that time when I was born with 3 older kids. My brother being about 6 or 7. My sisters were older sisters in their teenage years. And now she's got 4 kids and no husband in the home. She had not been working outside the home at that time. She had done some side work, but not something every day. And so it really, in her life, obviously, was devastating. And I'll go further with the case then and just simply say that the 2 individuals, while they spent a good deal of time in jail, by the time it was all said and done, the case had been chipped away so thoroughly that neither one of them truly spent time in prison for what had happened to my dad. Okay, so let's just leave that. But I mention that to say that my mother lived through all that too. So she had a very, very difficult time. And I'll not even a difficult time. She was unable to leave that behind. I think anyone who's been through a tragedy like that might say, well, you never leave it behind. It's always with you in some way. You know, time goes on. There may be healing. You may be able to, to move forward with your life. But if you've lost a spouse like that, if you've lost a child, gratefully I have not, but I'm just saying, I know in her case that she did not recover from that ever. It was always with her throughout her entire life.
And just to unpack that a second, so what happened was one of the individuals was convicted, and then on appeal,
Right.
He was found not guilty because of a coerced confession.
Correct. Now I'm getting back, and you're right.
Yeah.
You're right, Joe. Thanks for looking into that. Yes. So now we're talking about what happened back in 1961 to young African-American men who were picked up by police and then questioned regarding a case that they may have had something to do with or maybe didn't have something to do with, that a confession, was it truly a confession? Or like you said, was it a coerced confession? So we'll never know. Obviously, the courts made their decision back then with regard to the case. The one man in particular spent a substantial amount of time in jail without having been convicted. Okay, so again, I can dig as much as I want into that, but it's not going to change the circumstances of what happened, of something that I had nothing to do with, although obviously it impacted my life to where we are today. Back to my mom, though. She faced a very difficult situation. She was crushed and devastated by what had happened, having a difficult time moving forward, physically having difficulties too. And she made a decision later in my life, when I was at the age of 4. Her attention was brought to a school in central Pennsylvania, in Hershey, Pennsylvania, actually, where it was a residential school for kids at that time who had lost one or both parents. And the school exists to this day, the Milton Hershey School. And it's for children who, as they say in today's language, are socially orphaned. And obviously in financial need. There's a financial need barrier, a poverty barrier, that you'd have to be beneath that threshold to attend. There are nearly 2,000 kids at that school today, from kindergarten through 12th grade. Some people don't know the full story. If you look on the back of a regular Hershey bar, you'll see a little bit of it. It will indicate that if you bought that bar and made that purchase, that you've helped children in need. The reality is that Milton Hershey, the industrialist, was also a philanthropist. And Hershey gave his entire fortune to found an orphanage with his wife in 1909 that then became the school eventually and exists to this day. He gave his entire fortune to the school, all in the form of stock shares in Hershey. So the school is run to this day through the trust that Hershey established to run the school.
It's incredible.
And the trust is the majority shareholder in the Hershey Corporation. So the school is tremendously endowed and has resources to benefit young kids in central Pennsylvania, in the Northeast, and even here, there are children from Chicago that go to the Milton Hershey School. But it just shows how one person's gift to give a fortune like that has enabled so many young people, like me, myself, at that age, to have a different life than they would have had otherwise. So my mother dropped me off at the Milton Hershey School at the age of 4. If you have a 4-year-old, I want you to imagine that, just the decision she made to take your child and knowing that you couldn't support the child on your own effectively, and to take that child and leave them at that school. And you weren't allowed to visit your children, initially anyway, for 90 days because they wanted to kind of break that homesickness type thing, which of course is difficult to break. But
no, you were the youngest, so your siblings at the time. I know your brother eventually ended up going there as well. What about your other siblings?
Now, at that time, Hershey was a boys only school. When I was there, it actually changed to co-ed, and it's co-ed to this day. But back then, it was males only. In 1960, whatever, 4 or 5. So. Yeah, my brother Jim went there. He was older than me, obviously, and so we didn't have a lot of contact with each other in school because the school is broken into age group divisions. There's a junior, intermediate, and senior division, so basically kindergarten through 4th grade, then 5th grade, kind of like junior high, 5th grade through 8th grade, and then 9th through 12th. So we would see each other occasionally on weekends, and when my mother came to visit us, which she was able to do, we would see each other on weekends and on vacations too.
Got it. So now you're at the school. You are progressing well there. At that point, like, what was obviously at 4 years old, it's hard to probably dive deep into the coffers there and remember exactly what was going on in your mind. But at what point did you realize, like, I'm at the school, and this is like, did it feel normal to you? I guess is what I'm getting at.
Well, it became normal. I can't even put myself in my own 4-year-old mind to say, how did I do remember being at the student home. I was in a student home with 15 other boys. So it's a group home situation. So we're 16 kids in a home with a house parent couple. And I do remember walking in, and I remember seeing the kids were on the floor kind of watching TV or something. You know, you're on the floor, like, you know, you're laying down with your head on your elbow is propping up your head just as you're watching TV. I remember seeing that. And I do remember this, and it's interesting how you just remember just a little snippet of something along the way. My mom had apparently taken me to the school wearing kind of like imagine a little boy's seersucker suit, almost like a short set, right? And I remember later finding the fabric from that outfit in the cleaning rags box, which we all utilized as students in the home. We were responsible for cleaning in the morning and cleaning in the afternoon, in addition to going to school. I found the material in the bag, or in the box rather, that was used for where we went to find the cleaning rags to clean around the home.
Why do you think they got rid of your clothes right away?
Well, okay, the school provided clothing to all the children for free, and but part of that is that the school issued the clothing. So non-school issued clothing at that time, anyway, it's changed over the years, was not permitted. So it's not like it was a slap in my face. It was just that this is what we did. You wore something in that is not school issued, so therefore you're not going to be wearing it anymore. Well, what do we do with it? Well, we can at least use the cloth for cleaning rags in the house. So,
do you think looking back, the age was significant for you? Because you almost like it was so structured, and there was so much. You had to learn. You had to be disciplined.
Oh, it was a very disciplined upbringing.
And you were there when you were 4.
Right.
So if you look at someone that maybe gets placed there in high school, they already have kind of their habits, and they already have their mentality, and they're obviously probably still trying to grow, but they're in adolescence. They've already kind of experienced life. At 4 years old, you really haven't much. So do you think that has had a profound impact on your life being there that young.
Yes, absolutely. It absolutely did. I mean, the school would, and I'm unclear as to what their guidelines are at this particular moment, but the school prefers for children to come into their care at an earlier age rather than a later age for that reason, for that very reason. If you were, well, you're raising a child. So if you have the opportunity to raise that child from the age of 4 or even the age of 10, it's a different situation than if you're getting a child for the first time at the age of 13, 14. So, which it's much more difficult because obviously you're right. They've been through experiences, life experiences already that are formative in their lives and create expectations within them as to how things should be. Maybe freedoms that they had that they no longer have because they're in a disciplined environment, a structured environment. So at the age of 4, you're as most kids would be at that age, you're going
Right.
with the flow. You know, the adults who are in your life, if the adults change in your life in terms of who is supervising you and who's laying down how life is going to be run, well, you're going with the flow. That's just how it's going to be. You learn to adapt.
Yeah.
You learn to adapt.
So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot for the last couple of years is obviously the Chicago and its gang problem, and there's gang problems across the United States, but just because it's so close to home, and you think about when you have to invoke change or show kids that there's another choice or alternative, it seems to be that need is much, much younger than when you're even in grade school. And I know a few podcasts I listened to a while ago, they were saying like second or third grade is like where you have to really start introducing the opportunities to children to make sure that they understand that there's a chance and there's alternatives. Once you're in 6th or 7th grade, it gets much, much harder. And I was just curious from your perspective on covering stories for so many years and then your experience at the school. Is there, do you agree with that? Is there a fine line within that younger age to be able to get, and that's not to say someone can't change when they're older. It's just, you have a better chance.
Well, that would seem to make sense. I mean, I would say that at whatever the age is where you can, so to speak, reach somebody and provide mentorship and support and opportunity, that's better if they didn't have it previously. That is better than what existed previously. So terrific. I mean, there have been long discussions and child development experts have debated whether it's correct, for instance, in my case, to remove a child from their biological family and place them in a residential setting without that type of family support, and whether that's the right thing to do for a child. So. And it depends upon what that setting might be, obviously. And not everyone who went to the Milton Hershey School would necessarily attest to, oh, this was the best thing that ever happened in my life. I mean, there were certainly times when I was in the school, even though adapting to that structured environment and what was being offered to me, that probably at times I resented it, because simply you're in a place you hear and see of other kids who have, I'll call them, here we go, the normal families, where they're with their families. So they're going to school. They're coming home each night to a mom or a dad or a family member, and we're not doing that. So, there was a little bit of that along the way. But I would go back and just simply to answer your question, that if you had that opportunity at any age, there's a possibility you're going to give a child that break, that opportunity that they would have never had. And certainly, if it's done correctly, of course, with mentoring, it would be an opportunity that they would have missed out on if it wasn't provided to them. But the earlier, the better. Yeah.
So continuing on your journey, you're in the school, you are starting to grow up within that school, because you were there from the time you were 4 years old.
Kindergarten through 12th grade.
Through 12th grade.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, so through what we would consider high school.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
And along the way, there's something in that school that I read that you necessarily didn't like, and it allowed you, by you choosing the outlet of singing, you were able to move into a different area,
Well,
right?
what Joe's talking about is and this has changed over the years too. So as I mentioned, there are 3 different divisions of students in the school based upon age groups. You know, the younger, the middle, and then of course the high school group. And when I was attending there, when you move to the high school level, what we called senior division, the student homes, again, you're talking about 15 to 16 kids in each home, were paired with another student home, and the 2 student homes together ran a dairy farm. So it was our responsibility every morning to get up and take care of the cows. This involves cleaning the cows and milking the cows and feeding the cows, and of course, and cleaning up what cows tend to leave behind. So all of that was part of that experience. And you did that twice a day, of course, because in the afternoon when you came back from school, the cows are ready to be milked again. So there was all of that and taking care of it. I didn't care much for that at all, to put it lightly, Joe, but there was an opportunity. You're right. Those who were involved in music organizations that were full-time entities, and we had both a singing group called a glee club and a jazz band. Those 2 entities in particular, the students who were involved in those groups moved to different student homes, which were not paired and did not operate dairy farms, because the thinking was that the practicing that was necessary and the scheduling of tours and performances would take the students away from working on the farm. And anyone who has a farm know that the cows don't wait; they need to be taken care of. So that was a good thing. In ninth grade, I managed to. Actually, I joined the jazz band. I also joined the glee club as well, but was placed in a student home that was a jazz band home, so I got off the farm for the remainder of my high school years.
It's amazing. And part of that, I know you were traveling, so you were in this traveling band,
right?
Essentially.
Yeah, traveling band. Yes, we did. We would perform locally throughout the entire year, but then during our spring breaks, we would, I'm talking the glee club now, more so than the jazz band. The glee club would go out on a spring tour every year. We essentially would forfeit our spring vacation, so to speak, to go out as a group, and we would perform, you name it. We'd perform primarily through the northeastern United States, and more locally in the upper, Atlantic region, through Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, New York State. I'm trying to think how far we went, maybe Virginia, in that area, all by bus you're traveling by. So. But we would perform each night or each morning, sometimes at high schools, sometimes at churches, sometimes at community centers, sometimes whoever had an event that they wanted to have a group come in, we'd be scheduled and booked through the itinerary, and then we'd perform in those locations. And the deal was that we didn't stay in motels or hotels. We stayed in the local communities. So whoever was the sponsoring organization, pick one, Rotary, Kiwanis, a church group, whatever, the people in that group would then enlist others in the community too, but we would stay in homes in those communities. So 2 guys like you and I, let's say we were paired up in the singing group, we would go to one home and we would stay there for the night. And they'd put us up, we'd sing that night, we might sing in the morning, and then we'd be on the bus again and headed off to another place. And it was during one of those spring break tours, when I was actually a junior in high school, that we were going through north central Pennsylvania and Sullivan County. It's a beautiful mountainous area. Sullivan County at that time only had 1 traffic light in the entire county, so you can kind of get how rural it was. But I sang, the group sang at LaPorte High School, and I spent the night at a young girl's house who was in the high school there, actually. And she's not my wife now, but her best friend is now. Okay, so her best friend eventually became my wife, yeah.
That's awesome. And I have to ask this question. So for people that don't know the story, obviously, you met your wife that night, but then afterwards, I think you only met once, and then you wrote her a 10-page letter. What is entitled in a 10-page letter in one meeting?
Well, that wasn't immediate. First of all,
okay.
I left that day from their high school. My wife's name is Colleen. So Colleen and her best friend Kathy, all right, they saw us off as we were all leaving on the bus. And before I left, I turned to Kathy, whose home I had stayed at, all right, and I said, "Hey, do you mind if I get your address?" And she said, "Sure." So she gave me her address. And I didn't get Colleen's address at that time, and we left. So I wrote to Kathy a couple of times, and then, after that, I wrote to Kathy and said, "Hey, would you mind giving me Colleen's address?" So she did give me Colleen's address, and then I started writing to Colleen. So we wrote a number of letters. So that particular letter you're talking about, which was the first letter, much too lengthy for a first letter, but that letter began a writing relationship We didn't live close together at all. We were
Yeah.
probably, I mean, from where she is to where where she was to where Hershey is at least a 3-hour drive.
Okay.
So we wrote back and forth, and you got to rewind here a little bit and remember there's
Exactly, yeah,
there's
there's
no
no email
there's no
or-
social media,
yeah.
there's no email, there's no way to communicate with somebody, there's no mobile phone.
Yeah. Why don't you just text her?
This is back in the days where people would say, that's a long distance call.
Yeah.
I mean, because it costs
Yeah.
more. It costs more
Sure.
to dial out of your local area, and it was like the meter was running whenever you were making a phone call. So we wrote a lot of letters to each other. I've kept them. We have them.
Oh, that's
Now, there's a lot of letters there. A lot of letters, Joe.
And you've been married for 37 plus years
More
now?
than that. This
than that, huh?
this June we'll be married 40 years.
Wow.
40.
Oh,
40.
congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks.
That's
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank you. Congrats to her too.
Yeah. Congrats, Colleen.
We've made it. Yeah, it's a wonderful journey, Joe. I want to take it back to what I said in the beginning, though, too. And we've only talked about a number of things along the way, but how something happens in a life that then leads to another thing happening, and another thing happening, and another decision made, and another decision made. I have 3 kids right now, and I have 3 grandchildren right now. My 3 adult children, I mean, you've mentioned Kaylin already, who is the president and CEO of the Naperville Chamber of Commerce. My daughter, Kiara, younger than Kaylin, obviously, works for Google in Seattle. She's a software engineer. My son, Kian, lives in Chicago. He's an accomplished artist and amazing photographer and is working digitizing archival material for people so they have them as keepsakes right now. And it's just... And I should add as well that Kiara was born in China, and Kian was born in South Korea. So they're an awesome family. None of that happens, and bringing us here to today without every step that happened along the way. It's fascinating to me.
2 things I always say and I think about is life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you, is one. And second is the dots always connect behind you. They don't necessarily connect in front of you. So you don't know everything that you're going through and the purpose for it, but you can look back and say, wow, this is why this happened. Like me on the assembly line, started on the assembly line when I was 20 years old
for 4
as a young father, and no idea what I was doing. But if I didn't have that job, I would have not have been able to go to school while working on the assembly line, to get the job at Ford Motor Company, to be a car dealer for a few years, to create a digital marketing company focused on automotive. So it's like you go backwards and it's like, yes, that makes sense. But when you're going through it, you necessarily don't know. And that's why it's forward progress. It's progress over perfection. It's going every little decision that you take or make in life is a step toward the direction you want to go in.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And I'd also say too that I know you're a very goal-oriented person, and so am I. So you're moving towards something in your immediate future, and you may have a long-term goal as well. But things may happen along the way that modify your plan. But what I want to say is this: it's amazing as we're sitting here today that probably neither one of us could have written this script. You couldn't have sat down back there when you got your job at Ford originally and said, here's what I'm going to do, and here's how this is going to play out, and I'm going to make that happen. I could have never done that. Sat down at whatever age and said, I'm going to write this out, what's going to happen here, and we're going to be sitting here at this table today discussing it. There's just no way. That's a wonderful, miraculous type of experience that is life itself. So I love it.
It truly is. So talking about those steps, then how did you go from being in the traveling glee club to broadcast journalism?
I was always interested in communication, always interested in a message, in conveying information. I was obviously back in high school. Those are performance-oriented types of activities that you're involved in, whether you're playing a saxophone in the jazz band or if you're singing in a glee club. So that was interesting to me as well. I would say probably by the time I was in my senior year in high school, I had at that time a particular fascination with television and radio, even though I didn't know a whole lot about it. But I can recall even when I would go home to Philadelphia. Isn't that interesting? That Hershey, home was always where you were from, not where you were, even though I will say at Milton Hershey School, we referred to it as the home, in quotes, and it's kind of interesting. Anyway, when I'd go home to Philadelphia on visitation to visit my mom or on vacations, In Philly, in the Roxborough neighborhood, which is the highest point in the city of Philadelphia, are all the broadcast towers. And anyone who's familiar with Philly knows this. As you drive down the Schuylkill Expressway, you see those towers in the evening with the lights. They're all grouped and all going at the same time in the same way we'd look at the Willis Tower or Hancock here in Chicago, although they're all in one spot. And it was just mesmerizing to me. I was like, how does this happen? How is it that somebody can speak like we are here and be heard and seen by others at quite a distance away, and you can convey this ideas and information and experiences to people through the air at that time? It was fascinating to me. And even at Hershey, we were allowed to, at Hershey, have when you were going to bed at night, you could have, like if you had a transistor radio, if you even know what those are, a transistor radio, where you could dial up stations and you could listen for a few minutes, even like 15 minutes before they said, okay, everybody, all things off, or you'd be up to all night listening to something which you couldn't do. I can remember there listening to AM radio at that time. And if you're familiar with AM radio, in the summertime in particular, the broadcast waves have the ability to skip kind of over the atmosphere, so you can hear places at a distance that you would normally not be able to hear in your local area. So what I'm getting to is, even at Hershey, I could dial in at night and I could hear, it would fade in and out, but you could hear WCFL, the Chicago Federation of Labor, which that radio station at that time was broadcasting from the Marina Towers downtown on the Chicago River. But you could listen in. And here I am in Hershey, Pennsylvania, being able to catch a glimpse and hear, what are they listening to in Chicago? What are they talking about in Chicago? It's just amazing. It was like you get to travel by simply tuning in something and listening to it. And that fascinated me. And it's ironic that actually today, when I go to work each day, I'm 1 block away from where that broadcast tower once was for WCFL at Marina City. So I had an interest in that. And there were some family friends that had mentioned to my mom. They were one person in particular who was a mentor to me, who had clipped out articles from individuals who were interested in this kind of field. For instance, basically, where did they go to school? Where did they get the training for this? What did they study? And he brought some of those to my mother's attention. And eventually they brought Ithaca College to my attention, which was a school that I was not familiar with, but I wound up going to school there. And it was at that, again, there's a life decision. That was a tremendous gift. Ithaca had and still does have a tremendous journalism and communications program that really is awesome academically and tremendous on the practical side too. Obviously, I graduated from there. Interestingly enough, David Muir, our news anchor on the national news, ABC News, graduated from Ithaca College. Bob Iger, our former CEO of the Walt Disney Company, graduated from Ithaca College. So while it may not be necessarily well known here in the Chicago area, it's very well known in the industry and nationally too. Yeah.
Very cool. So then you've been on ABC for the last 30.
So my wife and I came here right after we got married. Okay. So we were married in June and we arrived in Chicago in October of 1982. So do the math quickly. It's easy.
Yeah.
This October,
40 years.
I will have worked for ABC and now Disney ABC for 40 years. I'll be honest with you. Before I came over here this morning, I stopped by a drive-through place to get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And it's a guy I see pretty frequently there who's
at the Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, at the Dunkin' Donuts.
That
right.
guy's awesome.
Mr. B, he's terrific.
Yeah.
Way to go, Mr. B. There you go. There's a shout out.
Yeah.
So he, for some reason, he says, "What kind of day you having?" I said, "I'm having a great day." Because he goes, "Man, how long you been working there?" And I says, "Oh, you wouldn't believe it." I said, "This October, it'll be 40 years." He goes, 40 years. Shh. He finished the word, but it was like he was almost like, I can't believe that. I can't even comprehend it. And honestly, Joe, sometimes neither can I. As we all know, time begins to go by very quickly, and even from where we all sit, we might say, I can't believe that in the past 2 years plus with the pandemic in particular, somehow time has taken on a different form, it seems to me. But even longer than that, it's amazing to me that I'm talking about that we're talking about having spent a full 39 years and now in my 40th year of working for ABC7 in Chicago. It's incredible.
Given your history, and obviously you've been doing this a long time, which is, first off, it's incredible the longevity that you've had in your position and how well known you are and what a great job you do and how disciplined you've been over the last 4 decades. I mean, talk about a role model and someone that we can all look up to and learn from. So thank you first off from that.
I'm going to immediately jump in and tell you this is a team sport, and I'm one player on this team. Yeah.
I also know you're very humble. But I'm curious, though, because of what happened to your father, the first time that you had to report on a story of violence, and maybe it's a story similar to what happened to your father, because Chicago is obviously an area where there is more crime than we want.
Yeah,
how
very much so.
Was that like? What was that like for you?
I have a keen awareness of the damage that's done to a family when something horrible like that happens, because I lived it. And I saw, even while I was at Hershey, I was aware of it, what was going on in my own family and the difficulties my mother and my brother and my sisters were facing because of what had happened. And it never goes away. You know, it's always there. Even those who successfully over time manage to obviously live productive lives and find happiness in other places, that aspect of it, of what happened, is always present. I mean, there's not we talk of closure sometimes. I don't know if there is ever closure. There is time that goes by, but there's still pain. That doesn't go away. There may be happiness, there may be joy, there may be love, but there's always going to be that pain. That's always there. And I'm keenly aware of that. When I have talked to families who've lost a loved one like that, or like you've mentioned, the crime situation in our city of Chicago, even I could talk about what we, on any given day, unfortunately, we have to report on. And I really mean, unfortunately, that we have to report on, because it's so disturbing. And we reach for answers, and they're so difficult to find solutions to this. But in this past week, you know, we have a mother who's accused of murdering her 6-year-old child, you know. And then we have last night a woman who, I believe she's 29, who was expecting, who was killed, who was shot almost execution style in her vehicle in the city of Chicago. And in addition to that, we had 2 young men, I believe they're like 14 and 15 years old, who were also killed yesterday. Those 3 things that I just mentioned happened in one day in the city of Chicago. And it troubles me greatly. People say, well, you bring your work home with you. Yeah, your work is always with you. It's frustrating that we have such a difficult time. And I understand why it's difficult, but it's just so frustrating that we can't get a handle on not fixing it. We want to fix it, but somehow addressing this to make a dent so people will stop doing these things to each other and be kind to each other.
Has crime gotten worse, or have we gotten better at exchanging information?
It depends on how you look at it. We can look over crime statistics over the years, and it ebbs and flows. Some years worse than others. I don't believe we're in Chicago anyway at the peaks that we experienced years and years ago, but we are at a recent peak, especially with regard to homicides in Chicago and Cook County. The information moves so fast now. The information, well, it's immediate. So that didn't exist previously. So we're probably hearing about more of it, but it was always happening in the past. But I think right now, it seems, we are experiencing a particular crisis of young people that unfortunately haven't received mentorship and direction in their own lives, and economically are not well off at all, and perhaps have lost hope. And in exchange for that, what's been exchanged for that is a different form of living that involves violence, and perhaps one could argue a callousness in terms of how you view other people and the value of life in general. And that's painful.
And that's the interesting thing, drawing the parallel to what happened to your father. It was 14-year-old kids, and that's what you see happening now. It's
Right.
Kids that necessarily don't have their full brain development, they don't understand the consequences, how they're impacting families and others' lives, and they won't until they're in prison or a decade from now. And unfortunately, like, it seems to be, it's getting younger and younger. And that's why I was kind of asking the question earlier. So instead of me trying to solve for it or to think through, I'd love to get your thoughts. Like, if you could create something to help these younger kids have hope, what would that be?
I can't say that what I went through is ideal for everybody, but obviously I would have been one of those kids on the streets of Philadelphia had not my mom made that decision that which she knew she couldn't handle me. And I don't mean I was out of line. I'm saying she just couldn't do it. So she made that decision to put me in the capable care of somebody else or entity who then provided me with the structure and the mentoring that I required through most of my life. She was not out of the picture completely, don't misunderstand me, but I'm just saying she made that decision for that reason. So I think at the core is reaching young people as early as possible to provide good mentorship in terms of an opportunity, staying in touch, providing wise counsel, checking in. What are you up to? What are you doing? And perhaps, if they're willing to listen, laying out the consequences of actions that they may have been involved in, or quite frankly, saying, what are you doing? What are you up to? Do you realize that this is not a good thing? Now, you may be successful and you may not be. The other side of that, that is those who have malintent intent. That can be a strong magnet pulling somebody, especially somebody who doesn't see any opportunity or hope in their own life. And I think those two things would be key. If somebody can provide hope and opportunity, and then in addition to the guidance that goes along with working with young people, that would be key. But like you've suggested, the earlier the better. I mean, those who are committing crimes at such a young age have missed out on that opportunity. We can, I don't know everyone's individual story in that way, but somewhere along the way, bad choices began to occur that then became magnified to the point of now you're out pulling a gun and going down the street tonight to see who you need to kill.
And when I think about your story, your mom had enough wherewithal to put her, we all have egos. She put her ego aside to say, I cannot raise my son the way he deserves to be raised. Is that a challenge too, getting parents to admit that there's maybe other alternatives for their kids?
I would imagine that's the case. Yeah, that can be the case. You think, and I'm not suggesting that parents should place their children in a residential setting completely or anything like that. I'm just saying that it can be the influence of a person who is in their lives. But this takes people.
Right.
You can't just, and you don't just walk in on a family and say, "Hi, I'm here. I can be your mentor." It doesn't work that way. These are relationships. These are not forced relationships. They are relationships that come with human beings, adult human beings, who decide, I care enough about this young person that I'm going to attempt to reach them.
It just feels to me like there needs to be more Milton Hershey schools, and there needs to be more of an ability to show parents that here's an alternative and it's feasible, and get your child in as young as you can, if that parent, and if it's right. Obviously,
right.
There's more good than bad happening out there. So we're talking about the families that need help or need hope or want the best for their kids, and they know they can't provide it.
I can only say that, as I mentioned, this one case that happened this week of a 6-year-old boy who was killed. And I think if that young boy had an opportunity like the Milton Hershey School, that would not have happened.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened. I wish there could be more Milton Hershey schools. It's a little sidebar topic as to why there are not more Milton Hershey schools. But when Hershey established the school, I'll just say that he established in his trust that it would be run a certain way, and it was to be run geographically, regionally. That is, serve the local 3 counties first, then move to the state of Pennsylvania, then to the northeastern United States, etc. But he did not establish it to be a satellite program that could be duplicated across the United States. That, however, does not mean others couldn't establish something of the sort on their own. But even if they're not, there are, oh my goodness, there are great organizations in the city of Chicago and elsewhere. I mean, we're talking about, it's not just the city of Chicago. We're talking great organizations that are working to provide mentorship to young girls and young boys to help them. To guide them. It's making that connection that may be crucial with an outside, not necessarily removing a child from their home or from their nuclear family. Yeah,
but it's a good point. There's at least a dozen in Naperville.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's not, but they can only do so much. The need is great.
I just always I think about this a lot, and like, how can you help? And to me, it's key to get to children when they're young enough to be able to give them hope, to be able for them to see the light, to see there's other paths. And I'm going to continue that mission. I know you are in some ways, but I just reporting on this and all of the crime, because it definitely seems to be like we're on a cycle, and we're on the high end of that cycle right now at its peak. I don't even know if it's hopefully it's at its peak, if not declining. Does it ever get tiring to report on this versus all of the positive stuff that's happening? Like, I know the headlines are typically the negatives in society. So is that self-perpetuating because that's what people want to tune into?
Well, it is, unfortunately, and we could say it's a bit of human nature that I've likened it sometimes in the past to that if we're walking down the street, we'll pay attention to the house that's on fire more than the home that has the beautiful garden out in front. But it's a bit more than that. And some of these things, we run an attempted balance of providing good news stories as well. I mean, we spent the past few days highlighting the Great Chicago Blood Drive that we put on with the American Red Cross for 2 days, just focusing on that in addition to our regular news coverage. But and I believe the last count was at least 1,300 units of blood that were being donated from individuals in the suburbs and in the city. And each unit, of course, has the capability of saving 3 lives. So that's a wonderful thing. It's
incredible.
That was done in just 2 days' time. And we've attempted to champion as well people who are doing good things. We have a whole, it's not I don't mean a franchise, but we have highlighted them as being things that we can be Chicago proud regarding. And so whether it's an individual or we had a young girl in the southern suburbs the other day who was collecting clothing for people in need and also collecting soup for seniors. So her goal is to collect 1 million soup cans that will be then donated to senior centers and other areas or individuals who are seniors who could use just the assistance of a meal coming their way. I know it's a can of soup, but it's something. And she's 6 years old doing that. So yes, we champion her. So those type of things we are highlighting. It may be true that we don't necessarily, if we think of what are the big stories of the day, think of her doing that, or somebody who donated blood because maybe they lost a family member from sickle cell and they realized the importance that these transfusions make in keeping somebody alive. Yeah. They're there, but you're right to the extent that it's often those other stories, and they are more troubling stories that get our attention and quite honestly deserve our attention. What is frustrating at times is that there's so many of them.
So many.
There's so many of them.
I can't even imagine an answer to this question, but I have to ask it. So over the last few decades of you reporting, is there a story or maybe 2 that really stick out to you?
Oh, there's so many.
I know.
And some are positive. Many are positive, actually. I'll tell you about some positive things. How about that? Well, I haven't talked to her in a long time, but there's a woman on the south side in the Roseland area who runs the Good News Daycare Community Center there. Her name is Pearl Willis. And Pearl has given her life to helping out young people, boys and girls, but largely girls in this case, because what Pearl does is she works with young girls who become pregnant, and she watches their kids after these babies are born in a daycare setting that is wholesome and great. And then, as a result, these young women can continue going to high school and graduate from high school, and then from there, hopefully, get training or at least a solid life foundation so they can raise their children and have good lives. She's doing that. These are things that are happening every day. There's been great stories. I've been very fortunate to cover the administrative aspects of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, the other side of that, of course, was the sexual abuse crisis, which we've covered as well. My point was just simply on a positive side too. The good things that have gone on with that over time. I've been so fortunate to, and it just kind of, I wasn't asking for it. It developed over time, but I've covered now 3 of our Chicago cardinal archbishops, and as a result, I've covered 3 popes in Rome in terms of what's been going on administratively within the Roman Catholic Church. So it's been awesome to be in Rome when a conclave meets and when a new pope is elected by the cardinal electors, and there's white smoke in St. Peter's Square, and the crowd goes crazy. It's one of the greatest reveals of all time. So those type of experiences certainly sit on my mind. And yes, there are many other experiences too that are not nearly as pleasant that we've covered over the years. And my goodness, the Chicago political scene in the city and the suburbs over that period of time, going back to when I started back in the 80s, with Jane Byrne, of course Harold Washington, and what was going on back then with council wars, and continuing the whole way through to where we are today. There's a lot of territory to cover there, Joe.
Yeah, I can imagine. Is there something, because I know you traveled a bunch covering stories as well, any travel experience that sticks out to you?
Well, I love traveling anywhere, even in my free time.
Right.
I'm the kind of person that if you said, "Hey, I've got a suitcase, you're packed up. Where do you want to go?" Let's go. I love doing it. I would have to go back though again to those the Rome trips. That you're working hard, but who doesn't want to be in Rome? I mean, you're working hard. You're up in the middle of the night, literally, because of the time differences, and we're live at Rome time. You're live at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and 5 a.m. So, and then during the day, you're covering what's going on. So you're exhausted, but it's really rewarding and incredible to be there. Those are especially. Has
there been a story ever that you didn't want to cover, or you? Oh my gosh. Or you refused to cover? Put it that way.
No. There may have been stories that when we were thinking about what the story would be about, and we went out to cover it, realized, okay, it's not what we thought it was going to be, and so therefore it's not deserving of coverage. There have certainly been stories like that. But I'm trying to think. I honestly don't recall a story where I said, I'm not covering this. I honestly don't remember that. No, I don't remember that. I think it would be in almost every situation, whether it was a great story or a not so great story, and I'm not talking about whether it was good or bad. I just mean whether the material was there and the information. Everyone has a story. So if something's going on and it's worthwhile at least looking into, that probably justifies doing the story in the first place. Now, that may change as the day goes on in terms of how much time we devote to it. For instance, if it's not substantial enough. But I don't recall turning down a story in particular for a reason like that, where I'm just not refusal to do it. Yeah.
The question on how do you report one moment on a very negative story or positive story, and then have to switch the next moment to something that's the opposite. Like how what skills do you have to develop to be able to do that?
Well, we call that it's called a tough turn. Well, the skills. This part of it goes with the producing of the news program to begin with. that really shouldn't happen. Sometimes it's unavoidable, depending upon what the coverage of the day entails. But when we're producing a newscast, we literally are thinking, okay, and in the sections of that newscast between commercial breaks, as it's being laid out, you're thinking, okay, we need the most important information here, and we're looking at the content of these stories too. We don't want a newscast that's filled with violence. We don't want a newscast that's filled with horrible negative things, and we'll look for opportunities, in fact, to provide a story that does not have that type of feel. So it's not just as continuous in that fashion. Or there may be a story. I mean, let's say we have 3 stories a day that are of that nature, in some way negative, you would say. Well, maybe that's in one newscast, and then in another newscast, and then in a third newscast throughout the day, not necessarily sandwiched together in a single newscast. Sometimes it's unavoidable. But anyway, back to the original question. When you're producing a newscast, you're looking at that story flow and how you would try to avoid that from happening. There would be other stories that are not of that nature that you might place between a story that is especially concerning or violent, and let's say now we're talking about the weather. You would create that type of a bridge from getting from one place to another. When it does happen, though, unfortunately, it may, and it simply requires thought. It requires, because I'm not just repeating words, I'm not just reading and speaking, I'm really thinking of conveying the ideas that I'm talking to you about right now. And really, as if I see it, speaking to one person and telling them what's happening today. So if we're talking about something serious like that, and then it may require something like, okay, well, here, let's talk about something else now. Or, I want to mention something that's a bit better to think about. Or, okay, I got to change gears here for a moment, and we're going to talk about something else. It may be done in that fashion too.
Got it. So it seems like authenticity is just a hugely important thing there. One of the other skills, if you will, that is hard to wrap my mind around is how much information you have to compartmentalize so quickly, because the news is almost real time.
Right.
I'm sure you've evolved over the years there. Like, what have you learned from that?
Well, I've learned that you can't know everything, and you never will. But you can know where to find the information you need, and with everything that's going on every particular day, you can at least be familiar with what's going on in those issues. And this could be anything. It could be we're talking about the latest COVID numbers and where they've been and where they are right now. There's been a lot of discussions about this. It could be about the types of masks that are now being said are much better to use than cloth masks, for instance, in an indoor, communal setting. It could be all those types of things where you have little pieces of information that you're aware of. You're aware of stories that are being covered and what's going on in the city. I mean, you do have to stay up to date. I mean, before we began this conversation here, I was in my car going through, just looking through. I read a lot of current events. I'm going through everything we're covering. I see our email flow from the work side. I see what's being published here locally too in the news organizations. I'm looking at the New York Times. I'm looking at the Wall Street Journal. I'm looking at the Washington Post. I'm looking at whatever I can get my hands on to just pick up essentially what is the conversation of the day, so at least you're familiar with it. But then once you get into it, then you're going to have to study. You're going to have to really dive in. Again, getting back to that, it's not just simply reading what somebody else wrote. It's knowing what the story's about. It's knowing what that story's about enough so that honestly, if the script went away completely, I could tell you what's going on. I could tell you what's going on. I may not be able to get into the details of specific numbers or something like that, but I should have an idea as to where we are at the particular moment regarding that issue.
Is there there had to be a time when there is malfunctions on the teleprompter or things like that? How do you react then? Like, because I think this could apply and be parallel to really anything in life when all of a sudden you're on live TV.
All right.
Which, by the way, I was recently on live TV on ABC to talk about the non-alcoholic brewery I was creating.
Ah, terrific.
And I didn't even realize that I said Naperville was a state, like on live
okay.
TV. Like, I have my 2 minutes, and I'm like, yeah, the state of Naperville. And I'm like, and then at the end of it, I thought I did a good job, and I played it back, and I was like, wait, did I just say Naperville was a state?
I was talking about the condition of the town when I said the state, not the geographic aspect.
And you can't go backwards on live
TV. No, you
TV.
can't.
So
No, there are no do-overs, and that's true. We have no do-overs. There's no delay. There are no do-overs. So if something happens, okay, a couple things. One, be prepared. Simply, be prepared. Know what the issues are that you're going to. You've already paid attention to the flow of this newscast. You should have an idea of what's coming next. So, and it does happen. It could the camera can go crazy. The teleprompter can drop out. Your script material can be gone. You can toss to somebody who's on a live remote, and we can't hear them. And so now we have to go on to whatever we can go to next. So, you gracefully tap into your noggin and figure out, okay, here's where we are going next. We're having some difficulty here. Obviously, we'll try to get back to that person in a moment. So let's move on for now. And now you need to know where you're going. So that takes preparation and the ability to know where you were, where you're going, what the next topic is, and the background knowledge that you have regarding it to at least make that transition to get yourself there. All of that. On the other hand, there are some times where things happen and they're so out of control and they happen so suddenly that there's not much you can do. And I think it's important in cases like that, where it's evident to the audience that something's really happened here. We're all human.
Right.
We're all human. Mistakes happen, you know, and so I think it's better if you acknowledge that, well, we didn't expect that to happen, but we had one case, this is kind of silly, but we had one case recently. There was a graphic that was positioned next to me, or was supposed to be positioned next to me, but when they took the shot, it was actually over my face. So I'm sitting there, you can't see my head, you can see the material there, and the director gradually moved it over as I'm talking, and as it went by, and I could see out of the corner of my eye what was happening there on the monitor. As it went by, I just said, oh, there you are. So it's that type of thing where, it doesn't have to be embarrassing. It's something that happened, and as we all make mistakes or things happen that we could not have anticipated, it's more how you react to it, I think, than the fact that something has happened. But being prepared is key.
As the leader in the newsroom, how important is it do people look at you? Like, what should we do? And how important is it for people to judge your reaction to know how to take those next steps?
Well, there's a couple things there. One has to do with what we're doing specifically in terms of story management and coverage and who's covering what. And so that this is a team sport. I mean, I'm one person. I appreciate what you're saying. But
you're the principal anchor, though.
One person, yes. Well, right. I take that responsibility very seriously. So there's a voice that I have in terms of talking about what we're doing and why we're doing things the way we do. That's true. We also have an entire management team that is responsible for structuring our people and our resources and our reporters and our anchors and determining, okay, what are we doing this day? Okay, they've already met this morning as we're talking here, all right? In fact, they've just finished their meeting. I'm not involved in that meeting. So all those decisions are made without my input. But later on, as we get into this, and as I'm looking at the shows this afternoon that I'm going to be responsible for, if I have questions or if I have a matter of clarity that I feel needs to be made, or I feel like something is written but it's missing something, that's how I'll get involved. And it may be a phone call to somebody, it may be correcting it myself, it may be going out to the newsroom and talking to the producers that we have there. And I say going out to the newsroom only because pre-COVID, we were all together in a very communal setting. And now, because of COVID, with distancing and the work environment and such, it's a bit different now. We have people still working remote, for instance, and that was going to continue for the foreseeable future. So they're able to do their jobs from their homes. So there it's now more through emails or messaging back and forth where you're communicating with somebody, where before it was a much more communal situation. Now, of course, with Zoom and other things, all the meetings that are being held can be done through that as well. So it's not like we have to gather in a group around a table to make these decisions. But I'll go back again and say, yes, there's a serious leadership role here, but also an awareness that this is a team effort, and we're all involved in it. And I work for and with a great bunch of people. I mean, they really are outstanding professionals, which makes all the difference in the world, too. Human beings, we're all humans. We may,
right.
And we're diverse. We're informed, they're skilled, they're gifted. It's sometimes amazed at what they do, often actually, and they're so dedicated and they work so doggone hard for excellence every single day. Every single day.
Is the we versus me mentality something you've grown into more over the years? Because I imagine being in this business, it's very cutthroat, and you started when you were very young, and you kind of have to. Well, it would seem to be like you have to think about yourself in some respects. Is that something? The more you matured, you realized the power of a team, or is that something you always kind of had?
I think there's been a metamorphosis in terms of the definition of that in my mind over all these years. I mean, when I started so young, I probably was very insecure and in my own abilities. There was actually two things going on there. One was you're naive enough to believe you can do everything and do it well. And then there's the aspect of whenever you do something and then somebody who's more professional in their stature than you is looking at what you're doing and saying, yeah, it's all right. Or a sense that you might have, justified or not, that because of your age, that you couldn't be considered as seriously as those who had been doing this for 10 years or 20 years, So that has changed over time. Back to the me versus we aspect of that. When you're starting out, there is quite a bit of me, but you quickly realize that the me doesn't exist without the we in this case. So the me from the 21-year-old kid that walked into ABC7 back there in October of 1982 became the we immediately with the realization that, okay, you're one of us. You're gonna earn the credentials to be one of us. Then once you are, now you're gonna grow, hopefully, within this organization. I mean, so there's a me and we component in all of this. I don't know if it's necessarily on a scale where one outweighs the other at a moment in time. I think they're continuous, but the we aspect of it is extremely important. Anyone who thinks in my business, well, I think probably in any business, that it's all about me. Well, I think you're fooling yourself.
Yeah,
I think you're fooling
I agree,
yourself.
but it does take it's like when you're young, you just have to prove yourself,
right.
and you have to put in that hustle.
Sure.
You have to think about yourself more. But as you become more successful, you can start to really rely on a team.
Well, that's true. There is a comfort in knowing that you've been there. There's a comfort in experience of knowing how to handle situations, of knowing the background, for instance, knowing history, local history and otherwise, of, okay, this relates back to something that happened years ago. So all of that's important. Even as you may be growing yourself into a leader in an organization. So
I've two more things. One is, this is going back to news for a second, because I would hate not to ask you this. The news is all over the place today. Like you can Google anything with anything, you could find an answer. There's so much inaccuracies.
Right.
How do you know as a consumer who's listening to this or otherwise, like, what is real?
Okay. Well, this is a great topic. All right, we could spend an hour talking about this, Joe. But I would say this. I think it's never been more important for consumers of news and information to be discerning and to consider whether the sources that they are relying upon are telling them the truth. Now we're getting into the definition of truth in people's minds. I can't speak to how everybody thinks about that, but I will say this. You're right that there is an information stream that is continuous and so voluminous and immediate. And unfortunately, it's not, you can't look at each source of that as being equal. I hope, this is my hope, if people could objectively stand back for a moment and look, okay, I see this information, but where is it coming from? And has that source been vetted over time? Have they earned their credentials, so to speak, in terms of being trustworthy? All right. And I think we also need to ask ourselves this. Am I only interested in hearing my point of view in everything? Or is there some value in hearing the views of others? So that perhaps, whether I agree with it or not, is there some value in hearing that out And do I even open up my mind to consider that there may be other points of view that either I haven't considered or maybe would be worthwhile at least me knowing? And I think that has value in itself. But as you've said, there are so many, for social media in particular, there's so many sources of information out there. Not all of them are credible. And unfortunately, we have seen where some working, whoever they are, working in ways that are absolutely malevolent in terms of simply existing to create discord within people of our country, and putting stuff out there that just is not true. But if the algorithm says you've seen this before and you're interested in this topic, you may see it again and again and again to the point of where you say, well, that's what the truth is. We probably have people in our own lives who we've had discussions with regarding whatever, pick a topic, where they say, well, I heard this or this or this. And you're thinking, well, that's not true. But they see it as truth because they've seen it so many times. Well, I heard, a friend of mine said, well, I saw a guy who, whatever it is. And that's concerning because it's important, I think, that we do establish the foundation of what the truth is in order to build our opinions on before we even start, or otherwise we're talking nonsense, and that may have a lot to do with where we are right now with discord and the inability to bring people together and discuss, and talk about things, even things we don't agree about.
So the two keys there are make sure you're looking at a very credible source, and second, try to absorb other people's opinions, to have more of a diverse knowledge of different takes on things. And
Right. And there's important to realize too, I guess you'd say, okay, with whatever it is I'm watching or listening to or reading about, where are they coming from? Where are they coming from? What is their goal with their existence? Why do they exist and what are they doing? If their goal is to create discourse or discussion regarding a particular area of thought which only a segment of people would agree upon, okay, well, it's not that you can't do that. Here we are. We have a free country. Anyone can discuss things however they wish in that sense. But the realization that that's what that exists for, I think, is important. The realization that another organization, and now I'm talking more about a news organization, that might exist for a purpose that is unbiased. And now I've crossed the line here a little bit here, but unbiased in its viewpoint. And I'm going to immediately say that we all bring our individual perspectives into and our life experiences into whatever we're talking
no matter
about.
What.
Yeah, no matter what. So, but attempts to, in a very legitimate way, show different points of view without taking one side or another, especially in controversial issues. That's a totally different entity than another entity that is saying, oh, no, we're taking this stream of thought, we're running with it, this is what we exist for. So I think that would be important to ask yourself, okay, why does this entity exist? And if they're putting out this information, do they have a reason for doing that? Is it merely to influence opinion, or is it to simply inform? And there's a difference between those two things.
So two more quick things. So along your career, obviously, social media and the internet has taken it's making a profound impact on everything. And with that, people tend to criticize more because they can in their little basements behind their computers and their underwear, and they could say things negative about others, right? And I'm sure, and there's good criticism too, but
not all of them are in their underwear, right? Yeah, okay.
Right, but there's definitely people that troll. Like, how did you learn over? Because you went from a period of like not having that, and now all of a sudden you are, no matter what you say, someone can make, and it could be very factual, it could be very short, it could just be in your mind indisputable. Yet someone can rebut that. How do you not let that get to you?
Well, you remind yourself that perhaps the easiest job in the world is to be an uninformed critic, and anyone can be one. If we choose to be, we can be an uninformed critic, or we can even be an informed critic. But we can be a critic, and that's a relatively easy job to sit back and decide how I'm going to pick a person apart because of something they've said, worn, done. The way they acted, the way they danced, whatever it might be. So there's the realization of that to not take it to heart, yeah, I think would be the main part of that. And you're right in that obviously there's a degree of anonymity that's provided to anyone who chooses to go out and say something bad about somebody else. Well, it's nasty. It's nasty. And to step away, if it's directed at you, to step away from it and say, okay, you know what, this is going to exist. This undercurrent is going to exist. I may not be able to, I can't stop it. But the best I can do is you can ignore it. You can ignore it. You can surround yourself with people who are willing to objectively look at what you're doing and let you know. If criticism's deserved, that's one thing. If it's simply somebody sitting like you've expressed and they're just simply, this is what they do most of their lives is criticize other people, that's a totally different matter completely. So, is there any truth to the criticism that's being levied at somebody or no? Is it something that's just, okay, whatever. Somebody's just spouting off and using their opportunity anonymously to take somebody down. Yeah. That's not healthy. Right. But if it's directed at you, to ignore it as best as you can. And then maybe set the record straight. If there's something that needs to be straightened out or something that needs to be corrected, well, then correct it. If there's something that needs to be explained further, then explain it.
Yeah. It's almost like you can't even win in some ways when you do rebut someone's opinion on something so erroneous.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. You're actually giving credence to what somebody said in the first place just by elevating it in terms of the audience that might be listening. People may not even be aware that somebody trolled information somewhere, and now by giving it that attention, you elevate it a little bit. So often I think it's best to just ignore.
Yeah, the only way to stop trolls is to starve them, I guess. Yeah. You know? So last question, because I could talk to you all day. I know you have a newscast to get to. I believe they're going to probably start serving lunch here soon.
We can start serving ourselves here in a minute. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
The person listening to this, you've had an amazing career. You've been, from what I know, an amazing father and husband to your wife, Colleen. What advice do you have for people when you think and you look back at your life? If there's like some key takeaways or some principles that you've taken and you think about to do what you've done and accomplish what you have.
Well, you mentioned Colleen, first of all. I'm going to say none of this would have happened without her. So, I mean, she is key to my life in terms of being the foundational rock that I can turn to and get honest opinions from and supportive, obviously, no matter what, but also willing to tell me whenever I've been out of line or whenever I'm doing something that may not be considered wise. So, I mean, she's key for me in that regard. I think that's extremely important. Whoever
have a partner
you can trust, who you know is not just going to feed you a line, and certainly is not in it for their own mere good or whatever they want to accomplish, but has your best interests at heart, and is able to say, "Here's what I think," and you can turn to that person. You can say, "Okay. All right, I may have not have thought of that. I may disagree with you, but okay, I hear what you're saying. I hadn't thought of that. Okay, that's important. Let me evaluate. Let's see what's going on." But they're with it in you, no matter what. Hopefully, you have somebody like that in your life where you know these. Maybe they're long-term friends. People that you know, they've known you. They've known what you've been through. They know you in and out, and they can. When you start talking out of line or say something to, come on, come on. Mm-hmm. Really? Alan, do you believe that? That kind of thing. I think that's really important. I also want to say, I mean, your theme here of not almost there, it's a good one. And I just simply say, and thank you for talking about career and longevity, but not done yet. Not almost there. Not almost there. Life is... This tapestry is such a wonderful, rich experience, and I just feel like there's so many things that I'd like to do and be involved in, and some of those things I already have been and continue to be, and other things where I'm like, okay, well, I wonder, maybe I could devote more time to that. So all of that, as life unfolds and you make those decisions, is important too. Surround yourself with good people. Surround yourself with good people is key. Find the right team. Find the right team. Be a player who at times is willing, many times, to sacrifice for the good of that team, and hopefully shoot for excellence every single day.
Amazing. Well, we'll leave it at that. I can't thank you enough for being just such a positive influence in my life and the life of this community here and many others that tune into you. I mean, you're a shining example of someone that has come from where you are, come from what you came from, put in the hard work, discipline, and still every day are doing it, but doing it in such a selfless way. So I just want to thank you so much.
Well, Joe, thanks. That's very kind of you to say. You know, I'm going to say, oh, not really, but whatever. Thank you. Thanks for all you're doing, too. This is really fun. I'm enjoying the discussion here, but beyond that, what you're doing in the community as well is awesome. Really appreciate what you're doing.
Well, let's get you to that newscast.
All right. Yeah. Breaking news ahead.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.